So no, Iran did not back Al-Qaeda. They backed the same side America backed against Al-Qaeda in Iraq War II. And then you talk about Syria. You say that Iran backs Al-Qaeda.
The question I asked was not about the question I asked.
Come on, man.
But you're taking me out of context. I said, no, hold on. You're taking what I said out of context. So I'm gonna finish. What I said was, are you telling me? No, you're taking me out of context, so I'm going to say it again.
Listen to what I'm telling you.
Just listen. It'll take 9 seconds. It'll take 9 seconds.
America.
What I said was, are you telling me that Iran has never backed Al-Qaeda or ISIS? Period. Full stop. For the time that Al-Qaeda and ISIS have been alive, has Iran...
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So I got another Piers Morgan debate coming in for you guys, and you're going to enjoy this one. There's a lot of back and forth. We've got three different perspectives. We've got the propaganda from Iran. We've got the propaganda from the United States, and then somewhere that falls kind of in the middle, if you will, more of the libertarian position from Scott Horton. But what I enjoy about these debates right here is because there's a lot to be worked out with all this. Check this out. We're going to get into the base facts right fast, and then we'll get into what's actually going on. Check this out right quick. So Trump says he wants to negotiate a nuclear peace deal with Iran. Now, that was kind of shocking when this was from a couple of months ago. Trump first comes into office, immediately comes out and starts talking about this. And I'm like, very, very fascinating this is, because hang on just a second. Didn't you destroy that nuclear deal that Obama made? I thought it was kind of ridiculous myself, and I was kind of cheering for that when it happened at the time. But, you know, looking into it a little bit further, that might be a pretty good situation. Maybe Trump should have came in and renegotiated that deal a little bit. I really don't know. I don't know a whole hell of a lot, or I didn't know a whole hell of a lot about Iran at the time. So Donald Trump gets back in office, comes out with all this, and it's kind of shocking to me because, hang on, there was an assassination plot that was actually spurred on by Iran. So it's kind of fascinating to me that, you know, Donald Trump's talking about working out some sort of a deal. But then we get this from 2 weeks ago. Trump threatens Iran with bombing, the likes of which they have never seen. Now, that is an escalation, if you will. And we're going to get into this debate. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I've got debate points coming in. I just wanted to break down the basis for where we're at right now and where this debate is going. So, without any further ado, let's jump into it, y'all.
Okay. Professor Mohammed Morandi, welcome back to Uncensored. Well, what is your reaction to Donald Trump saying Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and if the talks aren't successful, I actually think it will be a very bad day for Iran?
Well, first of all, I have to correct something, and that footage that Trump tweeted was of a tribal gathering for the Eid. And he murdered innocent people. It had nothing to do with ships. It had nothing to do with anti-ship missiles. And anyone can look up, use a search engine to see that this is how traditional tribal gatherings take place. So that's just one more war crime for the United States. Iran is not developing a nuclear weapon. Even Tulsi Gabbard admits such, and the United States admits that Iran, for the last 20 years at least, has not been developing a nuclear weapon. So Trump is being, the elderly Trump is being dishonest when he says that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He's implying that that is what Iran is pursuing. Iran is, its peaceful nuclear program is within the framework of international law. It is within the framework of the IAEA and the NPT. And so any attack on Iran by the United States would be illegal and a war crime. And of course, the United States does not have a mandate on behalf of the UN or anywhere else. So it's just another it would just be another act of aggression. But the difference is that Iran can fight back. It would not be Iraq. It would not be Afghanistan. It would not even be Vietnam. All the small, tiny Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf that host U.S. bases would be complicit. War would mean no more oil or gas from the Arabian Peninsula. That would bring about a global economic meltdown, and it would be the fault of the United States. And Iran can hit the United States back very hard. War is foolish, but the United States, since it has a history of bloodshed and aggression, Iran is preparing itself for such a possibility.
Okay, so that was obviously the propaganda line from the Iranian regime itself. Now, what I love about that is we're not the ones that are the instigators of this. We're not the aggressors in all of this. And then he goes on to actually say, you know, there'll be no more oil from the Arabian Peninsula, as a matter of fact. Like, sure, we have air bases, army bases all over that area, right? But those are not connected to the oil fields, my guy. So if you are striking United States Army bases, Air Force bases, military targets, all that oil would be completely left out of that. So that was an outright threat coming from this guy. Once again, love the propaganda on this. Now, I am of the opinion that we don't need to be involved in any of this myself, but I do understand that, look, we've got interests in that area. We need to take care of those interests in that area. But I think in history, as it unfolds, as we've seen, we have taken way too much interest in a lot of Middle Eastern activities, if you will, what is going on over there, like, you know, protecting Israel. And there's a lot of propaganda on both sides, as a matter of fact. Now, I think personally, you know, at this point, like I was talking about earlier, the whole nuclear deal with Iran, I love the fact that he comes out, he's like, oh, we're just perfect over here with this nuclear mess, all that nonsense, right? Like, how do we know that? How do we know that they don't have some secret, facility and they're enriching uranium for weapons grade uranium to build a nuclear bomb? How do we know that? We can't know that. Sure, we can have inspectors come in, we can inspect all of this all we want to, but that's a very mountainous area. It's a very large country. They do have the funds to be able to facilitate building an underground facility to enrich uranium, to do all this in secret. Sure, we have spy satellites and we've got intelligence and spies and all this other nonsense. But once again, who is to stop them from doing this in secret? That is my concern, as a matter of fact. And I think it's a genuine concern. These are the same people that talk about, wiping Israel off the face of the map, wiping the United States off the face of the map, chanting in the streets, death to America. This is the same group that funds, Hezbollah, Hamas, or somewhat Hamas, or at least traditionally they've funded Hamas. They've funded Hamas a lot. It just doesn't seem like they're doing too much of that lately, ever since the war started. But, Hamas seems to be left out to dry, if you will. But, I don't know if that's from a lack of trying or if that's just from, it's the fog of war and we have no idea what's really going on. But, I just love that propaganda line, them getting out here and saying, oh, no, we're the angels. It's the West that's the aggressor in this. You gotta love that. The sheer ignorance you would have to be to believe that, to just buy into that, just hook, line, and sinker, right? But once again, who is to say that they're not doing this? You could have all the inspectors from all over the world come in and inspect, and, it's hard to find a secret nuclear uranium enriching facility that's hidden underground, right? Like, how do we know this? We don't know this. And I think this was my original concern with the whole nuclear deal, is giving them the capability to do it and then saying, don't do it. Yeah, I don't know if we can trust that, as a matter of fact. But let's get the other side of this. Let's keep going, y'all.
I never knew I was going to do TV with someone that's basically in a hostage video, but now I understand how much control Tehran has over propaganda with their professors. I love how he acts like Iran is somehow peaceful when you guys are sponsoring the terrorist attacks on the Israeli innocent people. You're sponsoring attacks on American soldiers. You back all of the terrorist organizations, in essence, in the Middle East right now. And then you say, oh, we're a peaceful group that doesn't like war, and America's the warmonger. I will tell you, take this message back to whoever controls what you say. we're not screwing around. We don't trust you. You are a terrorist country that sponsors terrorism. You either come to the table and do a sensible deal, which allows for us to verify that you're not having a nuclear program, or prepare for the consequences of what you guys are doing. And the president is not going to be bought into this BS that you just put out there. He knows you're a terrorist organization. He knows you sponsor terrorism. He knows you kill innocent people. He knows you want from the river to the sea to annihilate Israel. And the president is never going to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
So that's the other side of the equation. Yeah, that's the other propaganda. I'm not going to buy totally into that. You know, the United States, we're not complete angels either. We've done our fair share of terrorism, if you will, in the name of fighting terrorism, if you will. So, you know, we're not completely innocent of all charges. I'm not going to buy completely into that. Have we done our fair share of, you know, putting our foot in the door where it probably doesn't belong? Yes. But, you know, on the other hand, were we protecting allies? Yeah, at the same time, did we take it a little bit too far? You know, the whole Iraq war was just a blunder of all blunders, right? Like weapons of mass destruction when there were no weapons of mass destruction. And I will be honest. I will be completely honest about this. This whole thing that's going on with Iran, to me, sounds like we're being fed another weapons of mass destruction thing. So I'm a bit weary of what's actually going on right now, but let's keep going and let's work all this out.
It's quite clear that the problems between the United States and Iran come from the United States. The United States carried out a coup in Iran, imposed the Shah, built the secret police, the Savak. Then the United States supported Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran. The West gave Saddam chemical weapons. I survived 2 chemical attacks. One was mustard gas and one was a nerve agent. And the West collectively was behind Saddam. Then they attacked
Did you guys
Iran
hold Americans hostage in our embassy in 1979 just out of curiosity, or do you just guys whitewash all of that with the propaganda?
Yes, that's a good point, actually. Students took the embassy because the United States, your regime,
wasn't students. It was the Shah regime, and the team,
your
buddy.
Regime
Come on.
Gave refuge to the Shah, who was a mass murderer who had slaughtered people on the streets, and they wanted him back. The United States was aiding and abetting a mass murderer who they were supporting. So
you guys aid and abet mass murder every day when you support terrorist organizations. Will you ever stop supporting the terrorist organizations? Forget America for a second. You guys kill innocent people in the Middle East. You guys chant death to Israel. So forget America. Will you stop supporting the terrorist organizations?
Yeah, your government is the government that supports terrorists. Your government helped create
I actually
ISIS
feel bad for you.
Tulsi Gabbard.
It must be miserable living in a prison where if you speak out against your government, you will be one of the disappeared ones. Because that's what happens to people that stand up to your terrorist government.
Where people are arrested. You're not. Where people in your country are arrested
I'm free, my friend. I can say whatever I want to in America, unlike with you in Iran.
You can say whatever
you want.
Dude,
your government propaganda. I feel bad for you. Like, freedom is not what you do.
If you don't want me to talk,
let me ask you this question: Has your country? Let me ask you this, Professor. Professor, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever disagreed, ever publicly, with your government in Iran on any one major issue? Have you ever spoken out, or are you so afraid of your government that you know if you do, you will be one of the disappeared ones?
Since I'm sure your problems.
One example, just deeper, one example. You don't have one because you can't. I feel bad for you.
But if you knew, if your problems are deep and serious, but if you knew Persian, all you have to do.
Do you notice how he's under duress here? He cannot answer that question
online, and you can go and
Professor,
watch me in Persian and see what I say about different administrations. But Piers, if you don't want...
Oh, let me jump in. But no, I do want you...
United States, don't invite me. Don't invite me.
No, Professor, I often invite you because I want to hear the perspective from Iran, as you know. But it's an interesting question that Ben puts there, which is we're having a kind of panel debate here, which is unlikely to be tolerated in Iran. in a broadcast manner. Can you think of anything right now, as Ben said, where you would criticize your government, for example? Would you be prepared to do that publicly now or not? Or is there a feeling that you can't do that with the Iranian regime?
Piers, be mature, grow up. You are the person I invited to come to Iran. You are the go take your medicine. You are the person who I invited to come to Iran to visit the country, and you refused the invitation. So you're not in a position to
because he's not an idiot.
You're not.
I wouldn't come to Iran either.
Journalist.
I don't want to disappear like you're afraid of.
Well, I'm glad you won't come, because we'd have to spend a lot of money on therapy for you, and we have enough problems because of the sanctions. But that aside,
let me ask you another question.
Yes,
let me ask one other question. Is there any terrorist activity that you condemn that your government has funded? Do you condemn the attack on the innocent people in Israel or any other attack by any terrorist organization that you guys have funded? Is there ever a moment in Iranian history in your lifetime where you say supporting that terrorist organization, funding, aiding, training, you would condemn the attacks and the death of innocent people anywhere in the world?
I condemn ethno-supremacism and an apartheid regime, and I condemn this Holocaust, and I condemn what Tulsi Gabbard admitted that the United States supported ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and they brought them to power in Syria.
I want to bring in Scott.
Oh, you gotta love that. Tough questions for the Iranian right there. You know, you gotta love when he says, oh, we don't support ethno-supremacism. What? How about religious supremacism, my guy? Like, these people are absolute terrorists, right? They're not completely just evil. Blanket. Sure. They've had some stuff happen to them that kind of maybe in a roundabout way, if you're insane, could justify some of their actions. But they do fund terrorism to a great degree. And you gotta love this, y'all. You gotta love the back and forth. I just love how he was going in, hey, how about you speak out against your government? As a matter of fact, can you do that, or would you be disappeared? As a matter of fact. You gotta love that, because that's a genuine question. If you ask me, you know, that tells you the freedoms of your country. How far can you go with criticizing your government? You can go pretty far in the United States. You can go all the way up until threatening the life of the leaders of this country, which, you know, once again, that falls into breaking the law. That's an outright threat. You can't really do that. But at the same time, you can criticize them all day long for anything and everything, and nothing will happen to you. You can't say the same thing in other countries like Russia, like China. Definitely China. North Korea is probably the worst offender, but Iran is right up there along with them. A lot of Middle Eastern countries, Saudi Arabia for crying out loud. Most of the world is not free to speak out against their government. And that's genuinely what we talk about when we talk about freedom, is how far can you push your government to say your government is doing bad things, which the United States absolutely has done a lot of bad things. Like I've already talked about, the Iraq War, the second one, and I'm not even sure if the first one was completely justified, because my stance on Russia, Ukraine, right? Like, who are we to step in on this? Was Kuwait an ally at the time? I was a little kid, so I really don't know. Maybe you guys could answer that down in the comments section, but I don't believe they were a close ally. They're not in NATO. None of that. I don't think we had any defense treaties with Kuwait. As a matter of fact, I just think, at least from what I can gain from history and from what I remember, that, hang on, that's where a lot of our oil comes from. So, yeah, we stepped in on behalf of Kuwait. Did they ask us to do so? Probably. But once again, does it justify it? I don't think it does. I really don't. That was a move we made. Might have been, justifiable to a certain degree, but I still don't think we were completely justified in doing so. But, if it brought the world back to normality, so be it. Saddam Hussein was definitely not an angel. Looking at everything in totality, I can't say we did the wrong thing, but I really can't say we did the right thing either. Could we have taken different steps? We did give an ultimatum. I do remember that. I remember watching George H.W. on the television give that ultimatum to Kuwait, and if not, then we were going to come in swinging, just boom, outright. And we did, as a matter of fact. And that was a defining moment in my childhood. I remember watching war every night on TV before I went to bed, for crying out loud. My parents sat down and made me watch this to learn, this is history in the making, if you will. But ever since then, our ties in the Middle East have been just, one blunder after another, after another, after another. A lot of these people, they use that. Right? This is what I can't stand. They use these blunders in the Middle East as a cudgel to say, oh, it's the Americans that support terrorism, not us. We're not supporting Hezbollah, blah, 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 blah. And, that's my problem with interventionism, if you will. Do we need to be involved, and to what degree? I've always said this, if we're going to be the global hegemony, if you will, we don't need peace through strength, as in going and attacking these people. To me, peace through strength is having this large military and having these countries afraid to defy the United States. So when we do send peace negotiators to, say, get the Iraqi army out of Kuwait, they will come to the table immediately, ceasefire, boom, when the United States steps in. Okay, we'll ceasefire, let's work this out, blah, 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 blah. And that's how I think. Now, is that a bit naive for some of these combatants, if you will? Like some of these people, they just go insane and they just want to attack everything? Sure, might be a bit naive. But do we take these steps? Sometimes we do. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we just start bombing Syria for no apparent reason. Did we ever go to war with Yemen, for crying out loud? Like, sure, that was the whole war on terrorism, the global war on terrorism nonsense, where, we committed blunder after blunder after blunder. Obama killed several American citizens. Killed a 16-year-old kid in a restaurant where there was collateral damage, where other just non-combatants got killed. Like, these are things that spur on these insurgencies, these terrorist organizations, for crying out loud. It's just nuts, and I think we need to back off of a lot of that. But let's keep going and see what else we've got here.
God, I want to play you a clip from Dave Smith, who was on my show recently, and he said this afterwards.
If Donald Trump actually does launch a war in Iran, not only will I not support it, I will apologize for the rest of my life for voting for the guy. I have loyalty to my principles and my country and my family.
Now, that's adding to the voice of Tucker Carlson and others on the right. There's no doubt that I think if Donald Trump was to attack Iran, it would not have widespread support on the Republican side. In fact, you could see large numbers of Republicans and conservative commentators criticizing that move, which makes it quite a perilous political decision for Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, especially considering how it's likely to play out. But I could just say thank goodness for Dave Smith and for Tucker Carlson and for the rest of the people on the MAGA right and the America First right who know what America First means. And it doesn't mean Israel instead. It means American national interests. And a war with Iran is not an American national interest whatsoever. Tucker Carlson and Dave Smith are both 100% right about that. And man, I got to tell you, I almost voted for Trump, Piers. And especially when I heard that guy, Jack Smith, filed new charges in the middle of October, I was like, no, that's it. I'm voting Republican. I can't stand. The Democrats deserve to be punished like they just burned Waco yesterday. I despise them. And I almost did, but I couldn't do it. And the reason why is because Trump is so beholden to Zionism and Israel. And it just is such, and we know this from the last time that he was in office, it is such a huge flaw in making America great and putting America first is Israel instead. And there's just no question that our anti-Iran policy is born in Tel Aviv. our friend here mentioned the Iranian Revolution, 1979. Well, that egg was on the face of Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, and he was the one, just as much as Carter, who was humiliated by the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis and the rest. Absolutely. But by 1993, the mean old Ayatollah Khomeini was dead. The new Ayatollah was in. They had a reformist president named Rafsanjani who was all about trying to kiss up to America. And Brzezinski said, we should build an oil pipeline from the Caspian Basin across Iran to the Persian Gulf, that way to make money and also to begin to warm up relations with Iran. Let bygones be bygones. And according to Steve Levine in his book on the pipeline wars, and according to the Washington Post, it was the Israel lobby back in 1993 that vetoed this warming of relations with the United States. And Brzezinski lost that battle. Instead, they famously made the BTC pipeline, cutting out Iran and Russia both. And so, and then on top of that, it was Yitzhak Shamir's advisor, Martin Indyk, who came in, and this is in Bill Clinton's first year, and said, where Clinton wanted to try to normalize relations with Iraq and Iran. It was the Israelis that insisted on the dual containment policy, which said Iraq is so weak because you just beat it up in Iraq War I, that now Iraq isn't powerful enough to balance against Iran. So now America has to stay in Saudi Arabia to bomb Iraq and to blockade Iraq and enforce the sanctions also against Iran throughout the 1990s. And Piers, as I'm sure you know, this is the primary cause of the September 11th attack. This is what caused America, Britain, and Saudi Arabia's terrorist mercenaries to turn against the United States, was bombing Iraq from bases in Saudi Arabia, a policy insisted upon by the Israelis. And it was also, of course, Israel's merciless violence against the people of Palestine and Lebanon that caused Egyptian engineering students studying in Hamburg to go volunteer for a Saudi to kamikaze our towers as revenge for what Israel was doing.
You haven't looked at the writings of Osama bin Laden and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind 9/11. I can't hear what you're saying.
I wasn't done talking yet. What?
Hold on. No. Well, I don't care if you were not done. I listened to you for a long time. Go off on something that's not factually accurate. So Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind 9/11, if you look at what he has said, he would say what you just said is not accurate. That's the guy that masterminded 9/11.
That's what he said.
Go look at everything that he said. That he said a lot more than that. And I'm sorry that it's not as simplistic as you're trying to make it out to be. Osama bin Laden's own writings. Osama bin Laden's own writings disagree with your simplistic way of describing this. But Piers, let me go back to the core issue here, which is today and now. I'm not in favor of invading Iran.
Referencing the beginning part of that clip, we're talking about Dave Smith and, Trump launching a war with Iran. I'm right there with him, right? Like, Iran would have to bomb one of our Air Force bases or Army bases or something unjustified, right? Like just out of nowhere bomb one of our bases for me to absolutely be okay with striking Iran. But I still wouldn't be okay with a full-scale invasion. This is not going to go how we think. This is not going to go the way Iraq did. This is not going to go the way any of these other little wars did. It's going to be a hard-fought war. We're going to lose a lot of equipment, a lot of men, for crying out loud, and I think it could be averted, for crying out loud. Like, none of this makes any sense to just go to war with Iran. Now, I think, honestly, I'm not really scared of that right now because I think this is a lot of bluster on behalf of Donald Trump. This is a lot of that peace through strength that Donald Trump likes to exude, if you will, getting out there and saying, look, we'll bomb the out of you, just blatantly outright. And you don't really know if he's going to do it. Sure, you might think, he's not going to do that. Right? If there's a 5% chance he doesn't, maybe you think about that before you do anything, and that's a negotiating tactic, sure, but I really don't think we're going to go to war with Iran. Now, he gets into this really crazy spiel talking about, hang on, we are the reason we got bombed on 9/11. This is pretty much jihadist propaganda, just outright, right? Like, this all hinges upon if you believe the letter to America from Osama bin Laden. Like, it was filled with a bunch of lies. Some of it was true, sure, but you can't use, United States reactionism to protect certain interests as a cudgel to launch an attack against the United. Like, it just doesn't work out like that. You're feeding into the propaganda. These same people were bombing Yemen, were blowing up citizens all over the Middle East, for crying out loud. This is something that needed to be stopped. Once again, you know, the United States coming in and defending its allies doesn't justify a terrorist attack in New York, for crying out loud. Sure, you know, where are the negotiations with these people? Where is it? Like, instantly you just go to terrorism and start bombing stuff, and then you sympathize with some of these terrorists, and you start buying into the propaganda. Oh, America is bad, blah 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 blah. Sure, we've made mistakes. I'm not gonna, deny that at all. We've made mistakes. Does not justify terrorism, for crying out loud. You're buying into that propaganda. You're buying into the jihadist nonsense. Because the reason I say that is, these people, they hasn't been just spurred on by the United States. The United States has only existed for a couple of 100 years at this point. How do you explain historical accuracy with all of the jihadism since before the United States existed, for crying out loud? You go look back, it's been fight after fight after fight, bombing after bombing after bombing, sacking cities and blah, blah, blah. The Middle East has been racked with terrorism, infighting, blah, 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 you name it, for millennia, for crying out loud. It hasn't been, so you can't just use it's the United States interventionism. I'm sorry, you can't just use that. Sure, that might have been the cherry on the top. Maybe we shouldn't have done those things. I agree, totally. But that still doesn't justify, taking further action to escalate even further when you can come to the negotiating table, for crying out loud, and maybe, hey, let's work these things out. Maybe let's give an ultimatum. How about United States? How about you back off and get out of our business? Instead, what do? They send a bunch of people to the United States and have them, do their thing in the United States, and then fly 2 planes, killing a bunch of civilians in the process in the United States. That is not, no, I'm sorry. That just, you cannot justify that whatsoever. And once again, I take it back to, maybe we shouldn't have done some of the things we done. But some of the things we done that, supposedly justify their position, we're just defending our allies, for crying out loud. Some of it was justifiable. Some of it wasn't. How do you differentiate between, I kind of ride the line between these two positions right here, because I don't think American interventionism needs to be to the level that it is a lot of times. Sure, peace through strength does involve a little bit of intervention. Once again, you got to send negotiators in to go talk first. You've got to try to work things out in a peaceful manner before the guns come out, for goodness sakes. And I think historically, America, at least for the past 30 years, has been a little bit too quick to pull the trigger before they open a dialogue, if you will. And that's pretty much what I got to say about that. But, there's a lot more we could have done, imposed, heavier sanctions, maybe enforce those sanctions a little bit more forcefully, if you will. Like, tell these people, stop funding terrorism, for crying out loud. Try to force them to come to the world order. I know I hate that term, but that's kind of what it is. And what I mean by that is not like some globalist elite nonsense. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I mean just, peaceful, interactions between nations. Right? We can work these things out peacefully, for crying out loud. Maybe it's a bit pie in the sky, a little bit naive to think so. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you can't, negotiate with terrorists. Maybe so. Why are they terrorists in the first place? That's what you got to bring it back to. Maybe we made some mistakes. Does it justify terrorism? No, but maybe we need to consider that next time we go to take further action to further justify, and I put that in quotes for a reason, because it's not really justification, but justify from their position their own actions to take terroristic actions against the United States, against the West, against Israel, against our allies, for crying out loud. Like, it's just a mess over there in the Middle East, and I just can't stand how, people fully, go to one camp or the other. You've got this guy from Iran. He's clearly propagandized. He's clearly like, oh, Iran's just the angel over here. And then you got Ben Ferguson, who doesn't allow people to speak, doesn't allow people to finish a sentence. For crying out loud, he's rude. And I can't stand that either, because that looks bad upon the United States when you're having international talks, for crying out loud, like these international discussions, these debates. These are good to have. But, when you got somebody like this professor, and we have our own bad professors in the United States who are propagandized, who can't take having a differing opinion be put in their face. This guy is clearly like that. He's like, you get rebutted a little bit, and all of a sudden he's like, well, I guess you don't want me here. You don't want me to speak. No, my guy, this is just discourse. This is standard discourse. What happens in free countries, as a matter of fact, right? You seem to be in a cult. That's what it is. When you're propagandized to that extent, he seems to be in a cult. And look, we need to work these ideas out. We need to have open, honest dialogue, discourse to work these ideas out. Hey, let you know what our position is, right? Without cutting them off, Ben Ferguson, for crying out loud. But I think I've rambled on for long enough. I want y'all to let me know what y'all think about all this down in the comments section. These always blow my mind, and I bet y'all knew I was going to say that, because I always say that, and maybe that's a little bit of hyperbole. Blow my mind, because my mind really isn't blown by none of this. But y'all let me know what y'all think. That's all I got on this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and y'all try to have a good day. Stay logical. Peace.